Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where we take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of big finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 29th of September 2019, I'm starting to look at the first story of Season 18, The Leisure Hive, starting with Part 1. There's actually a lot to talk about with Part 1 of The Leisure Hive. This is the, production-wise, this is the first story under producer John Nathan Turner, who is being supervised in an executive producer role by Barry Letts, as well as a completely new script editor, Christopher H. Bidmead. So this is perhaps one of the stories where you really notice a shift in just stylistic change and just like the way Doctor Who just it feels different, like the most different from since I think the last time there was a change was like this big and this obvious was the change from Barry Letts to Philip Hinchcliffe. But season 18 is one that you even get so much more. Now, what this is the Leisure Hive. Of course, you have Tom Baker, Lalla Ward, and back in as their character as a Doctor in Romana, and oddly enough, John Leeson returns to voice K9 after David Brierley left, but other than that, it feels like a completely different story. You immediately notice, like, from the opening, the title sequence is all different. It's been the music is completely redone for like the first done by Peter Howell, bringing it right into the 1980s, and the title sequence has been redone from the time vortex that we've had since season 11. So for like 7 seasons, and it's one that's been it's a story that's been there for quite a bit. But what goes on is that this entire story, and I'm going to be honest, I actually like the title sequence itself as a concept. The whole Starfield really gives sort of the spacey nature, and it really gives a mission statement for this era of the show. Though I don't like the picture of Tom's face that they use. He looks almost annoyed. It's much different from the classic one. But the Leisure Hive, just as a story, it feels so different. One, the humor has been dialed back. Tom Baker plays the role incredibly restrained throughout this first episode, cracking maybe like 2 jokes overall. This is also just a story where you have where there's a new director in the form of Lovett Bickford, who just the direction of this story, you notice how weird it is. As an episode, you get the just this weird sense that this weird sort of style of directing. Like, we open with a minute long shot of Brighton Beach as we just panning through these like bathing huts until they eventually get to you go past the TARDIS and rest right on you just sort of at land right on the Doctor and Romana on the beach. K9 then gets flooded with water, and they move like it's like, well, we're going on a different vacation. We're going to this planet Argolis, which is a planet of nuclear war. Like the opening shot is one. It goes on far too long. Like it's a minute of nothing. You're like, okay. And there are just these long transitions. Like the scene transitions out by slowly zooming back and then like dissolving to a space field, and before going right actually onto Argolis itself. This is a very weird story for being the uh, you know uh, where you really just you get this. It's really weird. Like there's several shots of just like um, of just just like these transitional shots that are weird. It's almost like they're trying to be experimental, um, which doesn't really work at all. Um, it's what's and you also just you have something, uh, you know, and what you have, and it's really experimental. Like there are a bunch of these shots of like these reptilian creatures on the outside of Argolis, which are supposed to be like creepy, but they're not. They're just sort of like, it's supposed to be building up suspense, but it doesn't effectively do that. Like it doesn't work. It's almost like this is meant to be kind of a built up of suspense and kind of just a little bit of um, of just a bunch of it's just a bunch of shots of like building up the horror, but it really doesn't happen. It's not really it's not really there. And then what you also have is just you have just a plot that is kind of like it starts out and it's kind of dull, like it's kind of introductory. It feels like the plot doesn't actually start being introduced for like 5 minutes into the actual episode. Mind you, the episode is only 23 minutes long, so you really do get like, okay, what's with this, what's with this plot. It's like there's this idea of like the characters on Argolis are being might have to sell the Leisure Hive and their entire planet to the Fomasi, a reptilian race that beat them in the war. There's like these experiments in tachyons, which the Doctor and Romana notice are complete BS. The Doctor and Romana are thought of a security breach. Mind you, this is in like the last 5 minutes of the episode, and the Doctor then slips into the tachyonic generator. It gets turned on by a mysterious hand that doesn't match any of the Argolin's hands, and then the Doctor is ripped apart in pain, and his screams can be heard over the closing credits, which actually, cliffhanger's really effective. I can give that. But as an episode, it takes too long, and it's very paper thin. It's an okay start. It's a very paper thin episode. We're not starting even on an okay note. It's a less than ideal start. It's a story where you kind of want a little more here. It's almost like you there needs to be just some more that the story does, and it doesn't. It's just sort of like, this is what we did. It actually doesn't really shine well on John Nathan Turner as a producer, or really anyone involved when it's just, this isn't a good start to a season. It's not a good start to a story. It's not the worst story you could have, but it's definitely not starting on a high. So overall, I'm going to give The Leisure Hive Part 1 a 4 out of 10. Alright, it is the 30th of December 2019, and I just finished watching Part 2 of The Leisure Hive. This episode is incredibly short. It only runs about 20 minutes long. Did I feel like even in then, if the pacing is just off, you feel like absolutely that very little has actually been accomplished with this story. I mean, you have the whole through line of the Argolans working with tachyonics to try, and some scientists from Earth to try and save their race. Which is a good, solid. It's that's a decent, solid way of doing a story. Good motivation, and generally, good. Um, generally a good idea, and it could easily make a decent story. But David Fisher seems to not be doing anything interesting with it. Like, the big plot twist is that these scientists from Earth are secretly frauds, basically trying to, I guess, con the Argolans out of money and trying to get them to sell, even though one of them seems to understand actual tachyonics, and is willing to try to make things work because he genuinely cares. It's this weird sort of, it's a weird sort of, kind of like a double act, but really a not really a double act per se, just sort of an act. It doesn't. What I'm trying to say is that the story doesn't make like that plot line in the story doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's really just sort of like, oh, we are trying to have, basically, it's basically like, here's another villain. Here's another villain, for us to, I guess try to care about, but we really don't care about, because like it's just you really don't feel like these villains are anything special. They're just sort of there, and they're there because kind of it's almost like we need a villain, and you have like the reptilian creature still just sort of skulking around, messing with the power, and being generally shadowy, but no one's actually commented on him there. And then like it like there's this implication, I guess, that it's supposed to have like killed this one human, so the doctor is put on trial, right, right at the end, um, right at the end, with like all the characters, with quite a lot of the characters basically being like, oh, here's where, here's where we get, a lot, a lot of interesting things, but you really don't get a real good sense of sort of what the story does. Like, it's one of those stories where you really, it's just like, oh, we sort of exist. It sort of exists, kind of in a vacuum, kind of nowhere overall. It's one of those. It's one of those stories where it's like, oh, it doesn't know what it's doing. It's, it's decent. It's decent at what it does, but it doesn't quite, fully do, some really, it doesn't do some of the best things it could do. It tries to be something big, but it doesn't succeed in that. It's just kind of there. doesn't, and like the big cliffhanger is the Doctor is now old because they make him go into the tachyonics. It's things like this that really don't work as a story. I mean, I guess I can, you can argue that the direction of this story is at least a little bit better, because it's one of those, it's one of those stories where you really do get a good sense of, you get a decent sense of what the story is doing. um, it's not the worst thing ever, but it's not, it's not that, it's just not, this episode just isn't very good. Like, I love it. Bickford seems to try with the direction. um, he really, it's like, yes, he's trying to do this, this big, uh, this big, plot, and it's like, I don't quite know what we're doing here. um, it's almost tiring to watch, because it's not like it's an amazing plot or anything. It's genuinely just kind of, it's like, it feels like we've paced up a little bit, even though, in pacing up, um, there just isn't, uh, um, there just isn't much there. Uh, um, there just isn't much. There isn't really much for the story to kind of, fall back on. Um, it's, it's okay. Um, it's just, it's the direction's okay, but the story itself is just plain bad. So overall, I'm going to give The Leisure Hive Part 2 a 3 out of 10. Alright, it is the 1st of October 2019, and I just finished watching Part 3 of The Leisure Hive. I think this part's even shorter. Like, they're just getting progressively shorter, is the thing with this story. And I don't like that. I don't like it because it doesn't work when you're telling a story like this. To really be doing a story where it's like, hey, here's this big, we're trying to do a plot, but we can't actually do a plot like this, because it's, because this is a story basically where the plot, is very little. Like, we're sort of shifting, like, we added this, there's this random added, I don't know if it's really a subplot, or maybe it's more like a B plot becoming an A plot, with Pangol creating the new Argolin and basically exposing the tachyonics as a fraud, even though, like, they have the potential not to be a fraud. Like, that's not really what fraud means. It's, a fraud is something that, like, would actually maybe, be a something, basically be something that's, cheating them out of stuff. This isn't really cheating them out of stuff. It's just like being, it's being a story of, it's a story about, like, getting people, I guess getting people to do stuff, but, like, it's like we're using, the theory works. It's just like the implementation of theory is what needs refining, and what needs essentially to be, essentially needs to be reworked, and redefined. It's because the so it's not really a fraud. Like, the Doctor figures out a way to reverse his aging, not by the end of the episode, but he has an idea near the end of the episode. Or I think he actually no, I think he does reverse his aging by the end of the episode. It's either at the end of this episode or I honestly don't remember, because the Doctor doesn't do much here. He basically talks to a Fomazi. Like he goes, you like who that's what that creature is, and it's like the big cliffhanger is Brock, the guy from Earth, is also a Fomazi. You know. Like by the end of the episode, the Doctor, the Doctor is back to himself, but and Pangle's like the big villain, I guess. Now he's going to be, basically, he's going to be cloning himself because he's a new Argolin, because that makes sense. This is a story where you really don't get a decent sense of what the actual plot of the story is, because it sort of just changes, it changes like that these Fomasi aren't the government of the Fomasi, they're a private group, which feels like it's supposed to be some sort of a commentary. As a commentary, it doesn't really work. It's just sort of there. It's just sort of like, well, here we have a sort of a commentary, but we don't really get, like, it's just nothing's done with the commentary. I mean, it feels like the entire story has been gutted from the inside out. That's really what a lot of this story feels like. Like, there was meant to be more here, but the story just in editing the plot, it just was, it just was like, just things were cut, and things that were cut never got really replaced. It's which is kind of sad, because it's it's not, this could have been something really, really, really solid, and perhaps a really, really good example of how to do it. But it really, the way it works doesn't. I'd say part 3 is somehow better than part 2. At least it was a bit more enjoyable, because you have interesting stuff being done with the characters, but still, it's not like it's that great of an episode, and it doesn't. This is a story that isn't doing much. It's just sort of being like, look at us, we have a story. Aren't you gonna watch us? Because we have a story. We're telling this story, and it's supposed to be something you want to watch. But it isn't. Like, the acting is fine. The direction seems to have decided, well, halfway through, we're just to have kind of given up. We're just gonna point and shoot. I'm done with these experimental shots. So it's gone from not good direction to not good, but at least fun to watch direction, to not good and bland direction. Yeah, I mean, there's enough here that's okay, a little more humor, and honestly, the ending is genuine. It seems like it is a good third episode twist, but it's not very good. So overall, I'm going to give The Leisure Hive Part 3 a 4 out of 10. Alright, it is the 2nd of October 2019, and I just finished watching the final episode of The Leisure Hive, aka Part 2. I mean, Part 4. Well, I've been doing too many audios recently. part 4 of the Leisure Hive is not. It's it's like some of the like David Fisher's last story, Creature from the Pit. It's a story where it's like, okay, here's 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 a complete other direction for the story. You know, here's here's where we get, you know, here's where we get just a a story about characters who really who really don't act in any sort of rational way. They're just there isn't this sense of sort of like characters acting like, you know, fully developed characters. Um, it's it's one of those it's one of those it's one of those episodes where you take such a vastly different direction that you don't really know where quite where the story is, you know, where like the story, what the story was meant to sort of be done properly. Um, you know, it's a story that where you get uh, you get the sense um, that you get the sense that that like that Fisher didn't know how to end it, so he didn't. Like the story itself, you have a big sort of a big sort of, you know, final um, you know you have a big story that ends in that ends with the you end with paying, like you end the whole we're doing the whole doing a quote unquote plot with um, you know a plot with the uh, with the Fomazi, where it's like, nope, the Fomazi Skirkleon wasn't evil. He was there to be able to capture some Fomazi criminals who and Brock the human was evil. He was a secretly a Fomazi the whole time, which is just like, okay, that's a weird that's just a weird way of doing this story. You know, it's like, oh, we're having the Fomazi back as, I don't want to say the villains, but as the villains, um, because it's one of those. It's one of those stories where you like. It's like then like the second half is like Pangol clones himself a bunch of times and tries to become basically the Emperor, and the Doctor stops him by just throwing him back in the machine and making it overload, turning him into a baby because, I guess because reasons. It's not actually, you know, a lot of, there's not actually like any much of, you know, sense made in the story. It's more of a it's more of just a, hey, here's where you get here's where we get kind of a conclusion, but not really a conclusion. Um, you know, it's just like, hey, here we go, and it's like, oh, we're gonna make an alliance with the Fomazi, and the Chancellor lady, whatever her name was, I genuinely don't remember. Um, you know, it's like, I'm gonna raise him better. Now we need to talk about. All right, time to go. Like, one, the episode's only like 21 minutes long, and like the first 3 minutes of the story is literally recap. This is one of the longest recaps for a cliffhanger just that's been done, and it's kind of, you know, a real pain to deal with, because it's like, oh, here we've got you know, a genuinely weird story, you know, where you kind of, it's like, okay, we kind of have a conclusion. You know, it's trying to be the end of a story when there really isn't much story to end with. It feels like things were just cut out of the script. I feel like perhaps David Fisher had a longer script, but like they just cut stuff, anything that John Nathan Turner deemed quote unquote unnecessary, at the very end. You know, it's something that the story really, you know, the story doesn't necessarily need. It's just maybe something was needed to actually, you know, build up to a conclusion of a plot. Like, there just isn't, it isn't much here. Like, this is, and as an episode, this does not reflect well on John Nathan Turner as producer. Now, full disclosure, I don't hate John Nathan Turner like some fans do, but I will call him out when he makes bad decisions, and it's clear, starting with a story like The Leisure Hive, where everything is so different, and like you've just obviously cut stuff out and you're doing this weird experimental directing thing, is not necessarily the best start for season 18. This does not necessarily bode well for the season. You know, it's not starting off on a right foot. Yeah, which is weird, because Fisher usually does give a decent script. Like, he's written 4 stories in total. 2 of them were good. 2 of them have been crap. He has a weird 50-50 shot, which is, and I feel like there's a decent story in here. If maybe the Fomazi were a little more interesting, the part 3 cliffhanger was actually the part 2 cliffhanger, and maybe we actually shifted to a different story in the second half. There's just a lot of stuff here that perhaps could have been improved. As it stands, I can really only give The Leisure Hive Part 4 a 3 out of 10. That being said, we add up the scores and average them out to give The Leisure Hive a final score of 3.5 out of 10. Thank you, everybody, for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And do join me next time when we actually finish. We basically finish the Tom Baker audios with the first part of the 2-story finale for Series 6 of the 4th Doctor Adventures, with The Skin of the Sleek.